Have you ever come across someone who made you feel deeply connected, yet at the same time left you completely uncertain about where you stand? One moment they look at you like you truly matter, and the next they act as if you don't exist in their world. Curious. Stay with this until the end, because once you understand what is really happening here, the way you see this kind of connection will never be the same again. You won't just feel a little better, you'll finally start to understand what has been going on inside your mind and theirs. This isn't simple confusion or mixed signals on the surface. It goes much deeper. At first, everything feels natural and effortless. The bond feels easy. Conversations flow without effort, emotions rise quickly, and you feel genuinely understood. For a short time, it feels like something real is finally beginning. Sighs. When it begins, everything feels aligned and effortless. But without warning, it starts to shift, not in a clear way, but through small changes that make you question everything. Their replies slow down, their energy feels different, and the warmth turns into distance. You find yourself trying to understand what went wrong, replaying conversations and overanalyzing details that no longer add up. The hardest part is that nothing ever clearly ends. There's no explanation, no closure, just silence and emotional distance. That uncertainty keeps your mind stuck, because when something ends clearly, your brain can process it and move on. But when it stays unclear, attachment deepens. You begin questioning yourself, your value, and what was real. Over time, your emotions get tied to their inconsistency. From the other side, people with avoidant tendencies don't experience closeness the same way. It isn't that they feel nothing. It's that closeness can feel overwhelming and unsafe to them. When emotional intimacy starts to deepen and the connection becomes more real, something inside them activates a fear response. Not necessarily fear of the person, rather fear of losing independence, being exposed, or becoming emotionally dependent. So instead of moving closer, they instinctively create distance. From your perspective, that feels like rejection, but from theirs, it feels like self-protection. This difference in emotional wiring creates a painful mismatch. While you move closer, seeking connection, they step back to regain control. And so a cycle begins where your efforts increase and their distance grows. Over time, this push and pull slowly drains you, shifting your focus from yourself to their unpredictable behavior. What keeps you stuck is not just the person, but the version of them you experienced at the beginning. The one who made you feel seen, understood, and emotionally alive. You aren't really chasing who they are now. You're chasing the version that showed up early on. And your mind keeps holding on to the idea that if it felt that real once, it can return again. But in the process, you start losing yourself. You become more focused on their patterns than your own emotional well-being. Their messages, their tone, their attention levels start controlling your mood. And even when a part of you senses something is off, another part keeps hoping it will return to how it was. The difficult truth is that not every powerful connection is meant to be stable or mutual, and clarity, not intensity, is what ultimately brings peace. Some connections don't come into your life to make you feel safe or settled. They arrive to challenge you, to test how strong you are emotionally, and to expose patterns you didn't even know you had. These are not calm, easy experiences. They feel intense, confusing, and at times overwhelming. They make you question your judgment, your choices, and even your worth. But hidden inside that discomfort is an uncomfortable truth. It reveals how much you are willing to endure just to feel loved or chosen. And that realization becomes a turning point, because once you start seeing the situation clearly, something inside you begins to change. You stop automatically blaming yourself for their distance. You stop chasing explanations that are never given, and you stop lowering your own standards just to keep someone emotionally available who keeps pulling away. Right now, though, you may still feel caught in the middle of it all, trying to make sense of something that feels real but unstable at the same time. You decide to move on. You tell yourself it's over. You try to focus elsewhere, and for a while, you actually feel stronger. But then, just when distance starts to settle, they reappear in some form, a message, a reaction, a small reminder of their presence. And suddenly, everything you rebuilt inside yourself starts to shake again. It feels like a cycle you didn't consciously agree to, yet keep finding yourself back in. The reason this happens is because your mind doesn't treat emotional experiences without closure as finished. It leaves them open, unresolved, and keeps searching for an ending that never arrived. The human brain is wired to seek completion, so when something ends without clarity, it keeps replaying, analyzing, and trying to make sense of it. Now add inconsistency into that equation, moments of attention followed by distance, warmth followed by silence. This pattern creates a strong emotional imprint because the brain begins to associate that person with reward, but in an unpredictable way. That unpredictability is exactly what strengthens attachment. You are no longer just thinking about them. You are anticipating the next moment of attention, the next emotional high. At the same time, the other person is not unaffected either. Even if they appear detached or unbothered, the connection still registers within them in a different way. And when your energy changes and you stop reacting the same way, they feel that shift, and the entire dynamic quietly starts to lose its old balance. They stop feeling certain that you'll still be there, and that uncertainty creates something unsettling inside them. So they return, not always with clear intentions, not always with emotional responsibility, but just enough presence to re-establish the connection. And as soon as they do, the cycle begins again. You open up, you start hoping, you tell yourself that maybe this time things will be different. Maybe this time it will finally settle into something stable. But just when that hope starts to grow, the pattern repeats itself. The distance comes back. The silence returns. The confusion follows, and you are once again left trying to understand how something that feels so strong can remain so unstable. This is the stage where many people start turning on themselves. They begin questioning whether they are too sensitive, too attached, or expecting too much. They assume they are the problem for feeling things so deeply. But the reality is not about being too much. It is about investing emotionally into something that does not offer consistency. And without consistency, there is no real sense of emotional safety. The mind cannot relax in uncertainty, so it stays alert, constantly analyzing signals, reading between lines, and waiting for stability that never fully arrives. Over time, this constant mental engagement becomes exhausting, even when nothing obvious is happening. You are drained not by events, but by anticipation. Because of that, your perception slowly begins to shift without you noticing. Uncertainty starts to feel normal. Low effort starts to feel acceptable. Emotional intensity starts to feel like depth, even when it is actually imbalance. Yet despite all of this, the connection doesn't simply disappear. It lingers in thoughts, in memories, in sudden emotional waves that come without warning. And that is what makes it so difficult to let go. Even when logic says move forward, emotions feel unfinished, like something still hasn't been resolved. That creates a quiet hope that maybe time will align things, maybe they will realize, maybe it will eventually make sense. But while that hope stays focused outward, something more important is starting to happen inward. You begin to notice the pattern instead of just living inside it. You start questioning not only what they are doing, but what you are accepting. And that shift in awareness changes everything. It pulls your attention back toward yourself. At first, it feels uncomfortable because you can no longer ignore the imbalance. You see how much effort you were putting in, how often you adjusted your feelings, and how many times you stayed quiet just to maintain the connection. And slowly, a difficult truth becomes clear. You weren't just part of the connection, you were carrying it. You were holding together something that was never equally held. That realization is heavy at first. It removes the illusion that things were ever balanced, or that more effort alone would have fixed everything. And once that clarity settles in, you begin to feel a different kind of exhaustion, not from loving, but from over-giving, not from caring, but from doing it alone. But within that exhaustion, a shift begins. Your reactions start to change. You stop chasing explanations. You stop overextending yourself for reassurance. You stop trying to fix the emotional gap by giving more of yourself away. It is not anger that drives this change, but awareness. And even though a part of you is still attached to how things might turn out, another part begins to choose differently. Slowly, you start choosing peace over emotional chaos, clarity over confusion, and most importantly, you start choosing yourself again. And this is the moment everything starts to feel unfamiliar, because you are no longer moving out of habit. You are moving out of self-respect. You are no longer trying to hold on to someone else's presence at any cost. Instead, you are protecting your own emotional space. That shift creates something powerful. Not forced distance, but natural separation. And in that space, the dynamic begins to change. The energy you once gave without hesitation is no longer as available. The attention they were used to receiving becomes limited. The emotional access they once had to you quietly closes. And that shift doesn't go unnoticed. It creates a reaction even if it is not immediate or openly expressed. Because the moment someone realizes they may be losing access to something they once had freely, awareness begins to form. They start noticing your absence differently. They start feeling the change in your energy, and that discomfort comes from one simple truth. The control is no longer one-sided. You are no longer chasing. You are no longer waiting. You are no longer trying to prove your worth through availability. And for them, this version of you feels unfamiliar because they were used to a version that was always reachable. Now you are not. This is also the point where many people lose their progress. The moment they sense even a small shift, they return to old patterns. They reopen emotional access too quickly. They slip back into the same position that created the imbalance in the first place, and the cycle begins again. But if you stay grounded in awareness, something deeper starts to develop within you. You become emotionally stable in a way that doesn't depend on their behavior. Your sense of peace no longer rises and falls based on their actions, and that changes everything. You stop being impressed by inconsistent effort. You stop accepting confusion as connection. You stop sacrificing yourself for uncertainty. This is what real growth looks like. Quiet, steady, internal, and once it takes root, there is no returning to who you were before. Even if they come back, even if they reach out, even if they try to reconnect, you are no longer operating from the same emotional place. The urgency is gone, the blindness is gone, the willingness to ignore red flags is gone, and in its place is clarity, not emotional confusion, but emotional awareness. And that awareness gives you something powerful, not control over them, but control over yourself. From this point, the entire experience transforms. The connection is no longer the center of your world. It becomes a reflection of your standards, not your need. And what happens next is no longer shaped by hope or fear, but by truth. At this level, things become simple. No more overthinking, no more guessing, no more trying to interpret mixed signals into meaning. Reality starts to speak for itself. At this stage, one of two things will happen. Either they rise to meet you, or they fade out of your life. There is no in-between anymore, because you are no longer engaging from a place of emotional dependence. You are engaging from self-respect, and that alone changes the entire dynamic. If there is something genuine beneath the inconsistency, your change will naturally demand a response, not because you are forcing it, but because the old pattern can no longer survive in your absence from it. They can no longer rely on minimal effort to maintain access to you. They can no longer take your presence for granted, and that forces a realization. They either step forward with clarity or they lose the connection entirely. And in that space, if growth is possible for them, it begins to show. Not instantly, not perfectly, but gradually, through more consistency, more intention, more awareness. But even if that happens, you are no longer who you used to be. You don't fall back into old patterns. You don't ignore what you've learned. You don't accept partial effort as something meaningful. You stand differently now, and that changes the entire nature of the connection. If it continues, it is no longer built on confusion or emotional highs and lows. It becomes something grounded, stable, and real, only if both people have done the inner work to meet there. And if that shift never happens, the outcome is just as clear. You let go, not from pain, not from frustration, but from understanding, because at this level you finally see the truth without distortion. You understand that connection alone is not enough, and that feelings without consistent action cannot create something lasting. You begin to understand that holding on to potential is one of the biggest delays to your own growth. It keeps you emotionally tied to something that only exists in imagination, not in reality. And the moment that truth settles in, something inside you loosens. Because now you are no longer attached to what could happen. You are grounded in what is actually happening. And what is real finally starts to make sense in a way it didn't before. At this point, the waiting stops. The hoping for change fades. The need for constant reassurance disappears. You are no longer depending on someone else's presence to feel emotionally stable. Instead, you start moving forward with more clarity, more strength, and a deeper sense of alignment with yourself. And this is where the real shift happens. In both possible outcomes, you come out stronger. If they grow and meet you with consistency, you engage with them from a place of stability, not need. And if they don't, you walk away without losing your self-respect. Either way, there is no real loss anymore, only growth and evolution. Because what felt like emotional confusion in the beginning was actually a process guiding you toward awareness. It was never only about the other person. It was about you slowly becoming someone who no longer confuses uncertainty with love. Someone who stops chasing validation and starts recognizing their own worth without needing constant confirmation from someone else. And once that realization fully settles in, everything in your life starts to shift. Not just this connection, but every connection that follows. You stop being drawn to intensity and start valuing alignment. You stop mistaking emotional highs for genuine depth and start looking for consistency instead. You no longer lose yourself trying to hold on to people who are inconsistent with you. Instead, you choose yourself, regardless of who stays or leaves. And that becomes the real definition of something being meant for you. Not two people forcing things to work no matter what, but two people meeting each other at a level where staying is a natural choice, not an emotional struggle. So if something is truly meant for you, it will not meet you in confusion or emotional chaos. It will meet you in your growth, in your clarity, and in the version of you who no longer feels the need to chase what is already aligned with who you've become.